Finally, the Pentagon has announced the actual timeline for the war against Iran after both sides, the US and Iran, refused to hold any talks to end the war. According to Reuters, attempts by Middle Eastern countries to launch a diplomatic process to end the war between the US, Israel, and Iran have failed, and both Washington and Tehran have refused to start negotiations. In particular, several countries made mediation efforts at the same time. Oman, which had served as a platform for negotiations even before the war, repeatedly tried to restore contact between the parties, but the US made it clear that they were not interested in this. Similar efforts by Egypt were also rejected. As a result, both the Pentagon and the White House officially stated that the war against Iran is dragging on, and they announced the actual timeline for the US military operation, which shocked many observers. I'm Alex Sipechi. Let's discuss this together. But before we start this episode, I ask you to subscribe to this channel, like the episode, leave any comment under this video, and be sure to subscribe to my Telegram channel, Pechi News. The link is in this video's description. So, the war in the Middle East is definitely going to last for a long time now, and this has been officially stated by the White House. But I'll start with the previous news. Attempts by Middle Eastern countries to launch a diplomatic process to end the war of the US and Israel against Iran have ended in complete failure, and both Washington and Tehran have refused to start any negotiations at all. According to them, several countries made mediation efforts, primarily Oman and Egypt. But both of those attempts ultimately turned out to be unsuccessful. President Donald Trump is focused on continuing the military campaign to minimize Iran's military capabilities, a senior White House official said, and here is the quote. "Right now, Trump is not interested in negotiations. We will continue the mission without interruption. Maybe one day that time will come, but definitely not now." Tehran has taken an equally tough stance. Two high-ranking Iranian officials reported that the country's leadership will not discuss a ceasefire until the US and Israel stop airstrikes and agree to pay compensation for the damage. Earlier, one of the high-ranking officials in Tehran stated that now, as a condition for ending the war, Iran is also demanding the complete elimination of all US military bases in the Middle East region. One of the sources for Reuters stated that if in the first days of the military operation, the Secretary of Iran's Security Council, Ali Larijani, and the Foreign Minister, Abbas Araghchi, were still discussing possible negotiations involving US Vice President J.D. Vance through Oman. Now these contacts have been completely cut off. Quote, "Everything that was previously communicated through diplomatic channels no longer matters. Further, according to Larijani, the leadership of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps believes that losing control over Hormuz would mean Iran's defeat in the war and is categorically opposed to any negotiations on a ceasefire. This again shows that IRGC militants have fully taken control of the country. The lack of willingness for dialogue on both sides suggests that the conflict could drag on for a very long time. One of the latest signals of the US's readiness to continue exerting military pressure on Iran, was the strikes on Karg Island. The main oil export terminal of Iran. I have a separate episode on this topic, and I highly recommend watching it to understand the full context of this war. In turn, the new Supreme Leader of the Islamic Republic, Mujtaba Amani, promised to keep the Strait of Hormuz closed and threatened to intensify attacks on neighboring states. At the same time, Donald Trump demanded Iran's unconditional surrender, and on March 15th he stated that he would continue to fight against the Islamic Republic, since, for now, the conditions for peace are, quote, "not good enough." Trump explained that any possible agreement must include Iran's complete renunciation of its nuclear ambitions. It became clear the war would last a long time. Especially since, the day before, Trump had already started asking partners to join the war, stating that it turns out this is a collective war. The day before, US President Donald Trump called on several countries in Europe and Asia to send warships to protect shipping in the Hormuz Strait, which is effectively blocked due to the threat of strikes from Iran. Next is a quote from Trump. I hope that China, France, Japan, South Korea, the United Kingdom, and other countries affected by this artificial restriction will send their ships to this area, so that the Hormuz Strait will no longer pose a threat from a country that has been completely decapitated. Well, then he goes on to assure that they have been completely defeated. And Trump stated that the US, they have already destroyed 100% of Iran's military potential. However, the regime in Tehran can still launch 1 or 2 drones, drop a mine, or fire a short-range missile at this crucial maritime route. I'll just add my own comment here. On March 15th, Iran launched a 2-stage ballistic missile, which shows that Trump's words are meaningless. But let me quote Trump. Trump will bomb the coastline to pieces and constantly destroy Iranian boats and ships. One way or another, we will soon make the Strait of Hormuz open, safe, and free. But the problem is that it was previously reported that Italy, France, and Greece have deployed their warships in the Red Sea as part of the European Union's Aspides naval mission. However, as reported by the British newspaper Financial Times, not a single European fleet is preparing yet to escort ships through the strait due to concerns about escalating the conflict. At the same time, according to the Financial Times, several European countries have already started preliminary talks with Tehran about reaching an agreement that would guarantee the safe passage of their ships through the Hormuz Strait. They say, let Trump continue his war with Iran, but Europe wants to preserve its trade. The Financial Times in particular mentioned France and Italy, saying that they are the ones negotiating with Tehran, but in Rome they denied any talks with Iran, while Paris refrained from commenting. As a result, US President Donald Trump's economic advisor Kevin Hassett stated that the Pentagon estimates the current war with Iran will last 4 to 6 weeks. However, he assured that in reality, the military operation is ahead of schedule. The conflict began more than 2 weeks ago and is now in its 3rd week of active phase. And now Hassett clarified that the final decision to end the war rests with Donald Trump. He said that only Trump will decide what can be considered a victory in the war. But according to him, the war will last another 6 weeks, and the consequences for the global economy are already being felt. Iran is effectively blocking the Hormuz Strait, a major global transit hub through which typically pass about 1/5 of all the world's oil production, and roughly the same amount of liquefied natural gas passes through. Under these conditions, the price of Brent crude oil closed above $103 per barrel on Friday. At the same time, U.S. Energy Secretary Chris Wright said on Sunday that the conflict will end, quote, within the next few weeks. After that, supplies will resume and prices will definitely go down. At the same time, he admitted that the Trump administration deliberately accepted short-term disruptions and a certain rise in prices when starting this campaign. He said, "We calculated all of this." But the Iranian leadership continues to show steadfastness. The White House rejects any hints of retreat. And Hassett himself noted that the situation is fundamentally different from the oil crisis of the 1970s. Back then, the West was critically dependent on Middle Eastern supplies, whereas today, the US is one of the largest oil producers in the world and is significantly less vulnerable to such shocks. That's a quote from Hassett. They think they can harm the American economy and force President Trump to back down. It's hard to imagine anything more ridiculous. We have more than enough oil. After the conflict is over, the global economy will receive a powerful positive boost. Yes, but let me remind you that the US is already releasing the strategic oil reserve onto the market, and it's very difficult to argue with oil market prices. Well, no matter how much oil the US has. I'll leave it at that. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments below this episode. Subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and don't forget to like the video. Also, if you found this episode interesting and useful, you can support the work of this YouTube channel with your donation or your subscription. All the links and details on how to do this are in the description of this video, or use the QR code. That's the most convenient option. I will be grateful for any support you can give. That's all for now. Take care of yourselves. Goodbye everyone. To be continued.